Welcome back to our soap videos. I'm Daniel. This is Gary, as it says down at the bottom. And we are starting a new year, right? And we got a little bit behind because I was sick and you were sick.
Yeah,
and just,
things happen. Yeah, so thanks for bearing with us on that.
Yep, thank you very much. We are working on a brand new soap card, this light blue one. Light blue reminds me of winter, and that's why I always do light blue this time of year.
Yeah, you're very color-centric, I noticed. Yeah.
In fact, my shirt, everything blends in. And for the next couple of months, we're going to be in the books of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And
not there a lot.
No, we're not. And that is sort of the...
That's the cool thing.
That's sort of the response that you get from some people. It's like, ooh, say Chronicles, Well... Chronicles has got some, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
It's you get most of 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings packed in here again, which brings up the question:
why do we need them?
Why do we need it again? Why do we need 2 more books saying the same stuff?
Yeah. Well, but I think that's an awesome thing. From a gospel standpoint, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have 4 versions.
It's true.
It's like, woo! And we know that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, whatever they are, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar to each other. Yeah. But yet they're different. Mm-hmm. And it takes kind of all 3 to make a complete story. And then you add in John, which is definitely different, and you get a more complete view of Jesus. And I would say something similar happens with Samuel and Kings and Chronicles. And then you brought up a great point on Sunday when you were talking about it, leading into the congregation, that Chronicles is more from God's standpoint. Yeah. And I took that to heart this week, and as I was reading through, I was like, I never noticed it before. And man, when somebody tells you that, you really see it. So everybody out there, as you're reading this week, think about it from the standpoint and the perspective of what's God saying. So one way to look at that, commentaries say it a little bit differently, depending on their commentaries. So if you just think of the Kings, for instance, in Kings it says this is what they did and this is who they were, and it's really more political. Right. Whereas Chronicles is going to look at the same events, maybe more from a priest or a prophet standpoint. Again, God's perspective. Yeah. So how does God see? This may look like a good thing in Kings or a bad thing. Well, you sort of get to see a non-political perspective on it, more of. Right. Well, and in fact, we see it this week, right? We have 5 readings. If you're reading in Chronicles, it's all about let's get the ark into Jerusalem. Yeah. 5 weeks or 5 days. When you read it in Kings and in Samuel, there's a different perspective on it. It was Daniel becomes king. The temple is being built. I guess that happens later, but and by the way, the ark is coming too. Yeah. It's kind of almost a sideshow, where in Chronicles it is the story.
It's the thing. Right. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the ark a little bit then. What do we know about the ark?
Well, we actually know a lot. Right?
We do. That's about right. It's about 2x3 box.
Yeah.
It's not very big.
Gold on the outside has the angels.
Yeah, the cherubim.
With the wings going together.
Yeah.
We know a lot. We know the size. There's poles. There's the lengths of the poles.
Yeah.
We know where it's stored, or where it was stored at the time, right?
In the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies, the most holy place. The high priest was the only one allowed in there one time a year, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, because the lid of the box, let's be honest, it's a box.
Yeah, right.
It's a box. The lid of the box was called the Seat of Atonement, or the Mercy Seat. And so one time a year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the high priest would go in, and after offering a sacrifice for his own sins, he then made a sacrifice for the sins of the entire nation. Yeah. And he would put that on the mercy seat, on the lid of the box. Wow. And the cherubim, who, like you described, their wings and everything.
The wings, I don't know that they touched, but they were close,
really
right?
close, right?
Yeah.
The whole job of the cherubim is to protect God's holiness. So they surround him and cut, the whole thing. And so the fact that this was the place where God's presence was in Israel. And now it's gone because the Philistines had taken it captive.
Right, and under Saul, right?
Yeah.
Right, so it was away, it wasn't there, and I think from a figurative point of view, I mean, God was no longer with Israel.
Yeah.
Right? And now David's trying to bring it back.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is one of those things that when God calls David a man after my own heart, he cares about these things that, we've had several years, we haven't been able to do it. It's not a big deal. It's symbolic. It doesn't really matter because... And David's like, hold on a second.
Yep.
This is everything.
Yep. And I think he really stressed doing it right.
Yeah.
Early on in the week, there's a story where they're moving it and an oxen slips or something, and somebody puts their hand out. Uzzah?
Uzzah.
Puts his hand out and is killed.
You don't touch the ark.
Right.
It's like touching God himself.
Right. And God is mad. And David actually got angry at it, which is kind of interesting from a point of view, can we get angry at God? And of course we can. Yep. Are we right to get angry at God is a whole other question. And David seemed to have worked through it. And because in later days, in the readings, this is the way we're going to do it. Yeah. We got to get, the Levites involved, and here's what's going to happen, and you guys are in charge of moving and touching, and
well, there's a great application there for us too. I think that sometimes we get mad at God because something doesn't go right. It's not like he doesn't kill us or anything, but and it may be even not judgment, but just consequences or results or whatever. And we're like, I'm just doing my best. I'm just doing what I'm. And God's like, hold on a second. Sometimes it's good enough to do your best. But there are certain things where God said, this is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And my best isn't good enough if this is how it's supposed to be. And in this case, I don't know that we have a ton of those, but in this case, God said, you don't touch the box.
Right.
I don't care what your intentions are.
Right.
Don't touch the box or you're going to die.
Right. I do think the next guy didn't touch the box.
Well, I've always wondered, because I heard this in Sunday school and everything, and I've always wondered, you mentioned the poles, right? Yeah. There's these rings on the side of the box. You put the poles in and the Levites are supposed to carry it.
We all saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah, exactly. Why is the thing on an ox cart to begin with? Why aren't they carrying it in the way they're supposed to?
Right. Is it that? Right, exactly. And there's lots of questions like that, too. Yeah. Also, is the manna still in there? And then Aaron's pole,
rod, the staff,
which has to be in pieces, right? A couple pieces for it to fit in there.
Yeah, it's not very long.
Really short.
Because the box is only like a 2x3, foot. It's not a huge thing.
Yeah.
The jar of manna, his box, and the Ten Commandments, the tablets with the Ten Commandments.
Right. So that's it. It's the weight.
Right. So one of the things that I really like about this week is it is about the ark, and it leads up. The whole thing is really about God's character. The worship of Him. You used the word off camera. That's really important here. God is a jealous God. Yeah. Sometimes we confuse jealousy and envy and just sort of put them all together as if it's the same thing, and it's not. Jealousy, so envy is sin. We're told envy is sin. Envy is like, you have this and I can't have it and I want it. Jealousy is when you strongly desire something that you have a right to
that you're not getting. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So God says He's a jealous God. He deserves worship. He deserves this. And they weren't giving it to Him properly. And David came along and said, we've got to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it when there's a line in there where David, where he's living is being built, kind of the seat or the county seat or whatever you want to call it, castle or whatever, and he realizes God did this just to show the other nations, I didn't do this, He did it. And He's elevating me for a reason. And how He stayed, especially at the beginning, very, very compassionate, very contrite, very down to earth.
Yep.
Way cool.
Yep.
Yeah, so a lot in here, people.
Yeah.
A lot of things to look at.
And here's the temptation. here's the temptation with Chronicles in general, especially First Chronicles. There's genealogies, there's lists of names and stuff. There and we in the
easy to skip.
We did skip some of those. We definitely did. And it's not because they're not important, but some we left in. And here's chapter 15 is a good example of this. There's names and there's lists, and the temptation is going to be just skip over it, scan over it. It's not a big deal. But because this is from God's perspective, the Chronicles, right? Because this is not just a political thing. If God has chosen to preserve 3, 4, 5 chapters about this is how worship was supposed to be done back then. We don't have a liturgy today. We don't have necessarily, here are the robes you have to wear and here's, the music you have to play. We don't have that today. Yeah. But God doesn't change. And if God says, at least at this time in this situation, their worship was so important to him that here's how you do it, it's worth reading.
Yeah. Well, I even take it a step further. We think it's solemn robes.
They're dancing,
shouting, blowing trumpets, sounding cymbals, playing stringed instruments. I mean, it was a celebration. It was more Mardi Gras than it was a march in there. Yeah. And really, they were bringing God home. So it should be a celebration.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
And one last thing. For those of you who don't like raisins, be grateful that you're not back in this day, because at this celebration, he handed out to each Israelite man and woman a loaf of bread, a date cake, and a raisin cake. That was part of the... And
it's amazing, right? How specific.
It's very detailed, isn't it?
We have these 3 things that you get. And a raisin cake.
And a raisin cake, yeah. Should we start doing that?
They hand out raisin cakes? It's like the lowly raisin cookie, right? Always the last cookie.
I thought they were chocolate chips.
Result disappointed. Fine.
Well, that'll get us into Chronicles, and there really is a ton of good stuff in these 2 books, and we'll spend some time on it. This card does not quite get us to the end. There will be one more week in 2 Chronicles, just because we
couldn't fit it on the card.
We sort of ran out of room on the card, so there'll be probably 1 or 2 more weeks in 2 Chronicles on the next card. So we'll be doing this for a couple of months and approach it looking at it from God's perspective, why God does what he does. If you're up to it, compare some of these things with 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, and see some of those differences. And if you have questions, always ask. I know there's one thing that'll show up here that people have asked me on a regular basis. That's a contradiction, because in Samuel it says this, and in Chronicles it says this. There's a contradiction in the Bible. Ooh, right, yeah. So
you'll leave that hanging?
I'm going to leave it hanging. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah.
If you see it before we mention it, go ahead and ask, because it's important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
That's good.
Well, go ahead and subscribe and like. In the links will be, I'll link my summaries to the introduction to not the whole, maybe the whole book. I don't remember, but I don't remember what I did before. But definitely the introductions to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and probably the whole book. You can read those too.
Yeah, nice.
All right.
See you all next week.
See you soon.